Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Jonathan Mills Patrick, and this recording is for another episode of the SouthFound podcast where I feature entrepreneurs and startups from the southern United States. Before we get started on today's episode, please, if you're enjoying the podcast, please head over to iTunes and leave a review. That helps the entrepreneurs and startups that I'm featuring be recognized and get noticed by other people, particularly investors. And it also gives me an idea of what you're looking for and how I'm doing in the podcast. So thank you so much for joining me. Today's episode is a little bit different than most. Today is not going to be an interview. It's just going to be yours truly, where I am talking about one of the most common questions that I get from startups. The most common question I get is how to meet investors. I've talked about that quite a bit and covered that in an earlier episode. I believe it was number 20 when I wrapped up season number 1 or 19, somewhere around there. In today's episode, I'm going to cover the second most common question I get, which is what investors look for in a startup in the first place. Not only do you have to meet investors, but you have to have what they're looking for from them to be interested in you. It goes a little bit deeper than the things that I'm going to share today, but I think this will give you a good basis on which to build on. Today, there are 9 different things that we're going to talk about. I'm going to try and cover them pretty quickly so that you can just capture the base information. If you have more questions, please feel free to reach out to me and we'll see if we can get you some help. So 9 different things that investors look for in startups. Again, this is not an entirely inclusive list, but it is some of the most common things in my experience of working with investors and doing some investing of my own, some things that are looked for. So the number one thing, the first thing that investors look for in a startup is actually the team. This is something that I talk about regularly, blog posts, videos, when I'm talking and working with some startups. The team is highly important. It's common for a startup founder to be a little greedy, a little tight-vested, and hold their equity to themselves, but an investor is typically looking for a team. A one-man show is often going to have some struggles in being successful. Investors love to see teams of people. The main reason is it doesn't matter how good your idea is. If your team can't execute on a business model, then you're kind of wasting your time. That's why when you see people who have successfully exited meaning they've sold out to other companies and had a cash return for their investors, co-founders or founders of startups that have exited before tend to have a lot easier time in raising money with investors because they show that track record of success. And oftentimes that's not just one startup founder or co-founder that's pulling that off. It's been a team of startup founders and co-founders. So investors love to look for a team of people in that startup that have a track record of success and bring different skill sets. One of my most recent blog posts, I talked about how that team should be structured, how you should split up responsibilities inside the startup. And I talked about how you should focus on each individual's strengths and what they bring to the table, not just their experience. So, number one thing investors look for in a startup is a successful team, a team of people that work well together and that are going to work well with their investors. Second thing I want to share with you that investors look for in a startup is, of course, a really good idea, but not just a good idea, an idea with a marketplace that wants that solution, a marketplace that is experiencing a pain point that they are looking for a solution that they will pay for. So an idea with a market, a pain point that they will pay for. It doesn't matter how good your idea is. If the marketplace doesn't really recognize that it is a good solution to their pain point and they're not willing to pay for it, then it's not going to help your startup a whole lot unless you're planning on being a nonprofit, which most startups are not, right? And investors definitely, while they will give to charity and things like that, most investors are putting money into startups that are for profit so they can get their return. So the second thing that investors look for in a startup is an idea with a marketplace that has a pain point, obviously that your solution solves. The other thing I want to comment about, number 2, the having a good idea, is one of the things I talk to startups regularly about is that being the first mouse is not always the best thing. Here's what I mean by that. It's a little bit crude, but the analogy is it's the second mouse that gets the cheese. I'm not going to tell you what that means. I think you can understand from the analogy. Startups are the same way. I'm working with a startup right now that is one of the first in their marketplaces to use a solution to solve the pain point that they've uncovered. And one of the things I told them is they need to be aware that the cost of educating the market is going to be quite large. So whenever you're the first solution to solve a pain point in the marketplace, and there's not much competition, if any competition at all. Remember that you're going to have a whole bunch of marketing costs in educating the community. We experienced that with Go Grab Lunch when we launched it in 2010. As far as we know, we were the very first to do what we did in the way that we did it. There were other networking sites, but the way that we paired people together was first. So we had an idea with a marketplace that had a pain point that was willing to pay for our solution, but what really ended up costing us to some degree was the idea of educating the marketplace. Got a little bit off track there, so just summarize back to you. Number one, startup investors are looking for a team. Number two, they're looking for an idea with a marketplace that has a pain point that is willing to pay for it. Number three, they're looking for an industry or an area that has good market size and market share potential. Let's break those down for just a second so that we're all on the same page and understanding what that means. Market size is what it sounds like. It's just the total number of dollars available to everyone in a market. So fast food would be a market, and in the market size would be probably billions, if not trillions of dollars. McDonald's would solve that pain point, Burger King, all the others. So market size is the total addressable market size that is available. The reason that matters to investors is if your market size is just too little, there's not enough money to be made. So they're looking for an appropriate market size. Now, if your market size is too big, that probably means it's already cluttered with competition. And so there may be a little bit of adverse to that. So a market size somewhere in that middle ground is often preferable. They're also looking for market share. So that is the portion of the market size that your solution can carve out, whether there's existing incumbent companies that you're going to be peeling away market share from, or whether there is a brand new market that you're going into along with others. They're interested in what amount of market share you think you can peel off. Now, I want to give you a little caution here. One of the most common comments we hear in a pitch is a startup founder will say, I just need 1% of market share. The reason they're doing that is because, frankly, it's just an easy number to pick. They feel like they're being conservative, and the investor's going to hear that in their pitch and think, oh, they're being conservative, surely they can get 1%. The problem with that methodology is a lot of startup co-founders are using that as a crutch, and they're not doing the research to understand what an appropriate market share is. It could be that 0.5% is an appropriate number. It could be that 1% is not, and maybe 5% is. That's all based on market size. So make sure these two work together well when you're presenting them to an investor. You don't want to claim that their market size is $1 million and the market share that you're going to get is 90% of that. That's just not an appropriate type of way to present your idea. So do your research, understand your appropriate market size, and then come up with some reasonable projections on market share. You can find that through doing research on what others are doing or other similar industries. That was your third tip for what investors look for in a startup. Number 4 is going to be intellectual property. This is things like copyrights, trademarks, and IP for your solution, patents more particularly. With IP, investors tend to prefer patents above the others, meaning copyrights and trademarks. While those are beneficial and they like to see those in place, a lot of investors that I know and have been around tend to really enjoy the idea of investing in a startup that has at least a patent of some sort or a patentable solution. When we talk about patents, what I see most commonly with a startup when they're presenting is that they have a provisional patent. Keep in mind, that just means you filed for a patent and that you have what's called a provisional in place. There's not much protection from that. The real protection is when you get an issued patent. So while investors love the idea of intellectual property and patents, if you have a issued patent, it certainly goes much, much, much further than a provisional patent. So investors like, fourth thing they like in a startup is intellectual property, whether it be patents, copyrights, or trademarks. By the way, one more quick side note, this is one of the places that I do not suggest that you skimp. A lot of startups that I work with try and save money here by going through online resources to file for their patents or do it themselves. I get it. Money is not always, people don't always have just a ton of money to pour in these resources, but please at least take your time and think through working with a qualified attorney, qualified intellectual property attorney, someone who focuses on that part of the law, not just a general attorney who's dabbling in it. At least look at putting your resources into this, because if you truly are going to apply for a patent and hope to get it, you want it to be filed appropriately and not get turned down because you didn't do a good job or explain things in enough depth. So the number 4 thing that investors look for in a startup is intellectual property. The fifth thing has a couple of these combined together, but I wanted to separate it out because you're going to be asked about this. The fifth thing investors look for in a startup is barriers to entry. And this can be a lot of things. For example, what we just talked about, intellectual property could be considered a barrier to entry. Time to market could be a barrier to entry. Maybe there are political factors that are impacting your startup industry, and you have already worked through those and figured out how to comply with those political factors, and other startups have not. If that's the case, you have a barrier to entry for any competition that will be coming in after you. So investors like barriers to entry because what it does is it slows down any competitor that would be coming in. So the fifth thing investors look for in a startup is barriers to entry. Number 6 is skin in the game. Investors love it when an entrepreneur and a startup founder has put their own money at risk, not just their time. Now, not every startup founder has a lot of discretionary dollars to put into their idea. That's okay. Even if it's just putting $5 in to go to Fiverr.com and get a logo created for your business. How can you expect an investor or anyone for that matter to put money into your idea if you've not put some of your own skin in the game? So make sure whatever resources you do have available, you've put some of those into play. Please don't risk everything. Take the chance of going bankrupt just for your idea, but have some of your own skin in the game. It's not right to go and ask other people to invest in your idea if you're not taking risk as well. This is something I see quite a bit with startup co-founders. Frankly, it drives me a bit crazy. When I started Go Grab Lunch, granted, I was fortunate to have some discretionary dollars I could put into play, but I did risk my own money, and it went a long way with the investors that we talked to. So the sixth thing that investors look for in a startup is skin in the game. The seventh thing they look for is a really good deal. They're just like everyone else. Investors like it when they have a good deal in front of them. Now, of course, part of a good deal means negotiating with an investor, going back and forth on what equity you're going to exchange in lieu of the money that they're putting into the company. And there's a little bit of a dance to that, but investors are like everybody else. They like a good deal. Imagine if the number of startups that they're talking to that are putting opportunities in front of them, if you have a similar opportunity as someone else, they see as much market size, they see as much market share potential, the teams are almost identical, the ideas both solve a really good pain point, and all these other things we've talked about. If you get down to this one where they're looking for a good deal and you've asked for $100,000 in exchange for 10% of your idea, and someone else has asked for $100,000 in exchange for 25% of their company, then it's likely an investor is going to go that route because they're getting a better deal. Again, you shouldn't give up more equity than you need to, but neither should an investor give up more cash than they need to. It's about finding a good balance and making sure it's a win-win for everybody, starting the relationship off on the right foot. The seventh thing that investors love in a startup is a good deal. The eighth thing investors love in a startup is when there's other investors already in the deal. I've seen many a time, and it's happened to me as well, where an investor will say, am I the first? Is there someone else that's already in there? We see this quite often with large institutional investing firms out of Silicon Valley, where if one company goes in, others are more likely to go in. It's true for any startup, whether you're in Silicon Valley or East Tennessee or New York or Boston or any other place. Investors love it when there's other investors already in the deal. It doesn't mean it's a given that they'll invest in your opportunity. Each investor may have their own process and due diligence that they go through. But if other investors are in the deal, then it means there's at least some fire where there is smoke, and so they're more likely to look at the opportunity and take it seriously. Then the last thing that investors look for in a startup opportunity is what we call traction, and particularly early traction. The longer you go on in your startup's life cycle, if you're multiple years down the road and you've not been able to raise any money or get any sort of other milestones accomplished, it's less impressive to an investor. So investors really like early traction. That means to them and signals that the opportunity is very hot, that you obviously have something going for you, and so they tend to be attracted to those type of deals. Other types of traction could be numbers of users. Obviously, revenue is a good thing. It can be back to patents. Early traction can include some patents that you've been able to have issued. Early traction can also be other investors. So this last one, number 9, in things that investors look for in a startup, does include some of these others we've already talked about, and then some. Investors really like early traction. Just signals to them that the team knows what they're doing and is able to execute on a business model. So let's round it off. I'm going to go through them one more time real quick, all 9 of them, and just rattle them off to you, and then we'll wrap this up. 9 things that investors look for in a startup. First being a solid team. Second being an idea with an addressable market and a pain point that they're willing to pay for. Third being market size and some market share potential. Fourth being intellectual property that you can put in place to protect your idea. Fifth being some sort of barriers to entry like political means or regulatory means, any other type of barrier. Early traction, by the way, can also be a barrier to entry. Sixth being having some skin in the game, that the founder and or co-founders have put their own money at risk in the idea. 7 being they're looking for a really good deal. 8 being others investors. They love seeing people who have already put money into ideas. That signals to them that there might be something there and that they should pay attention. And then finally, just some early traction, a team that's able to execute and get things moving along. Investors see this as a little bit of a hedge against the idea that the startup could stall out. So thanks so much for joining me today. Hope you enjoyed this information. Again, it's probably the most second common question I get after how to meet investors. Think these through. Think where your startup falls when it comes to answering these questions. If you're going to be meeting with investors, having some answers or at least working on some solutions in these areas will certainly strengthen your ability to raise money in the future and scale and accomplish growing that business that you want to do. Again, thanks so much for joining me. Hope you have a great day and take care.